Good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited to welcome you to the second installment of our collaboration with Ready to Launch. My name is Dr. Anjamarie Hancock Alfaro. I am the director of the USC Dornsife Center for Leadership by Women of Color. And I'm thrilled again to be able to welcome you to one of our virtual events. So this is the second of three that we're doing this academic year. And I am especially thrilled because I get to introduce you to our fearless moderator. And she is both my friend and my colleague. Dr. Dyogi Phillips is assistant professor of political science at the University of Southern California. And her research addresses political behavior, electoral institutions, and political incorporation with an emphasis on the intersections of race, gender, and immigrant communities in American politics. Her first book, not her last, her first book, Nowhere to Run, Race, Gender, and Immigration in American Elections, was published in June of last year. And the book is an intersectional and national study of changing patterns of descriptive representation in American state legislatures. She examines how growing immigrant communities are reshaping the roles that race and gender play in American electoral politics. And her analysis pays particular attention to the pathways and candidacy of Asian American and Latinx peoples. Prior to her work as an academic, which is also part of why we wanted her to moderate this panel, Dr. Phillips led organizing and political campaigns in the American labor movement. She received her PhD and MA in political science from UC Berkeley, an MPA from the School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton, and her BA from Hampshire College. So it gives me great pleasure to turn things over to our wonderful moderator, Dr. Dyogi Phillips.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction from my friend and colleague, and someone I'm really proud to be on the faculty with, Dr. Hancock Alfaro. I'm really pleased to be here with you today and begin a conversation that I hope will not only shed light on a part of representation and advocacy in politics that I think many people don't know enough about and that can be fairly opaque, but also to sort of broaden our understanding of what representation means and where representation of communities that really are fairly still marginalized in politics much of the time, where that representation can take place, right? We're really going to be sort of expanding where we go looking, to quote Kathy Cohen, to understand where power and representation really happen in American politics and government today. So what I'm going to do is ask each of we have three wonderful panelists with us today, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly when they respond to my first question. And I'll start with just by, since we only have an hour together, I really want to start by asking about, what sort of giving us a context for understanding why staff and pipelines to staff are so important. There's been lots of coverage of the gains that women of color have made in the last few elections at the federal level in particular. But it's clear there's still a great deal of work to do in terms of representation. And that work that needs to be done to ensure that those who work on behalf of our communities in government and in advocacy actually reflect the communities that they serve. My work, as Dr. Amha mentioned, in politics and in my book, was really focused on understanding the opportunities that women and men of color have for being represented in government. And there are many pathways to representing those communities. One set of those pathways is by serving on staff, but that itself can take so many different forms, right? There's, serving on a candidate's campaign staff, there's serving in the office of an elected official once they're in government, working in an entirely different government agency, or working in nonprofit and advocacy organizations as well. And so I think that some of the strategies and approaches to exploring those opportunities for the type of work are really what we want to focus on today. So I'll start by asking our panelists, can you tell us a little bit about why is it so important that we have women of color in particular more well represented and more present in these different types of staff roles in government and politics?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off since I'm Charlotte White, and I'm one of the co-founders at Ready to Launch. And our organization is specifically focused on diversifying the staff pipeline by providing women of color with more resources to access these spaces. And this really came out of my own lived experiences, as well as my co-founders, of trying to break into this space ourselves. And so I'm a USC alum. I was a political science major, and I actually started my career working in finance. But when I decided to make the career change to work in politics, I found it very, very challenging to figure out where to go, how to find jobs, how to access resources. I didn't even know what jobs were out there. I was like emailing Democratic parties and doing all sorts of crazy things, and no one was responding to me. And so I actually reached out to one of my professors at USC who happened to know somebody who was hiring for some local campaigns in LA County. And that's really how I got my foot in the door. And so I've had the opportunity to work in campaigns on both candidate campaigns and ballot measure campaigns here in California. I've served on the board of the California Democratic Party's Asian Pacific Islander Caucus and worked in nonprofit and served on the board of local nonprofits here for the last few years. And that really was the changing point in my career and the inflection point in my career that stands out to me. And when, I was going through the pandemic and thinking about the impact I wanted to have with my career, it really came back to this idea of wanting to scale that kind of inflection point, and how do we at scale help other women like us break into the space. And so there's so many opportunities, but I think people just often don't realize what pathways are out there. And that's really kind of where this work started, because I've seen in all of these different spaces that when our voices are not at the table, and, I've seen this being oftentimes the only Asian woman, the only young person in a lot of these spaces. And when your voice is missing in the staff side, particularly, I think, there's been a lot of emphasis on electing women to office. And I think we obviously want to support that wholeheartedly, but the staff are implementing and writing policy. The staff are the people on the inside who are making sure everything gets done, that their elected officials are advocating for and pushing forth. And so when we're not in those rooms, when those decisions are being made, our experiences are left out and not considered. So that's really why I think the staff pipeline needs more attention, and why we need to have reflective staff just as much as we have to have reflective elected officials.
Great, thank you. Jessica, can we turn to you? Tell us a little bit about, you've had a different journey towards this work, and tell us why you think it's so important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, she, her, hers. I'm the training associate at ARENA, and we convene and train the next generation of progressive political campaign staff. And yes, I come to this work from what I consider maybe less of a traditional political background. I had got my undergraduate degree in theater arts administration, spent years working in theater, working in fundraising for the arts, before turning to more broader cultural organizing. I've worked with equity and diversity within the field of arts administration, making sure there are pathways towards people of color, creating sustainable careers in the arts. In there, also got training as a meditation instructor, and a degree in art and public policy, which is where the politics comes in my work. And I really feel passionate about this work because of that non-traditional background. Because at ARENA, we really believe that there's no one degree that will train you to work on a campaign. And specifically in my work in helping to train people in working on campaigns, we often say that people come for the candidates, but they're going to stay because of the people that they're working with, which is why it's so important that in those rooms, in campaigns, that we really see a reflection of the community. We want to work with folks that understand our experience. We want to be able to see ourselves reflected in the campaigns that we're working on and to work on campaigns that reflect our values. And also making sure that they are reflective of the diversity of the communities in which a candidate might be working in. So, making sure that folks who are working on campaigns know that there is no one traditional path that you need to take to be able to do this work and to be able to have an effect on getting that candidate that you believe in, who supports your values, and which also sees your diversity reflected in their staff. I really believe that those are the sort of campaigns that we should be building and working towards. And yeah, that's the lens that I bring to why it's so important to see, in particular, women of color in this work.
Great, thank you so much, Jessica. And Jess, can I turn it to you? Why do you think this work why is it vital to have women of color in these pipelines and working on these staffs?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little background for me, I am currently the communications manager for Pay Our Interns, a nonprofit focused on ending unpaid internships across all sectors. But prior to that, I worked in every level of government. So I like to say I sort of hit like the political bingo. And one thing I've noticed throughout the years, whether it was working at city council or whether it was working as the communications director for a county board of supervisors position, is that if you don't have women of color in these positions, you don't necessarily have people advocating. And I think a really good example is during the start of the pandemic, right around January 2020, I started hearing word of this pandemic coming out of Wuhan, and I started flagging to a lot of the people I was working for at the time, we might want to sort of look and reach out to the API community and see what they need. And because I was the only staffer in the room, everyone was like, well, it's really not necessary. It's really not that big of a deal. I actually had someone tell me, oh, well, the API community likes to keep to themselves. And obviously we've seen sort of since that point in time, there has been an uptick in hate crimes against the Asian community. And to this day, I feel like if there had been more API staffers in the room, we could have better advocated, we could have better supported the community, and we could have prevented some of the trauma that we've seen. So I think it's very, very important to have these faces, these people who understand the community, who can not only argue for the community, but also reach out to the community and ask, what are you seeing right now? How can we help? We are your voices and we are your pipeline essentially to these elected officials to get you the resources that you need. And without that, then we're just going to keep seeing sort of these situations happening over and over. So that in a nutshell, I think staffers are needed for their advocacy and their experience in these communities that other staffers who are not staffers of color just cannot necessarily bridge.
Thank you so much, Jess. And thank you. I want to thank all of our incredible panelists for being with us, because they have such a range and a really rich range of experiences to bring to the table for this conversation. And Jess, I want to follow up on something you were talking about that resonated for me, which is I've also been the only Asian American in the room on a staff. And that was actually my first job in politics, unpaid internship. And, for me, decades ago when I was an undergraduate, I got the memo that you're supposed to do an internship, especially if you want to think about a life in advocacy or politics. But I really understood that as, the good internships, the ones where you can really speak for your community, are unpaid, right? So if I wanted to have an Asian American woman in the room, the cost was going to be that it was unpaid. And as somebody who's from a first generation immigrant family that's fairly low income, there was just a big part of this equation that didn't make sense to me, right? How do I live for a summer, right? Or I had one summer where I lived in DC and worked full time for no pay for a nonprofit agency. And how do you live for an entire summer without pay when during the school year you work 2 jobs to stay in school, which was my experience. And the way I made that work was by living on chicken bouillon and cold cuts for 3 months, which I don't advise, and isn't sustainable, right? And isn't actually how we create pipelines. We just create sort of leakiness or definitely ad hoc opportunities for people with resources. So I wanted to start with you and ask about, how should we think about some of the real structural barriers or challenges for accessing these types of opportunities, and particularly if we can start by thinking about internships as one way, and sort of move into thinking about what it means to be on staff, and sort of, is the model of interning that I experienced when I was an undergraduate, is that still sort of the expectation that people have, or should we have different expectations, both for the what the cost is for serving in these types of organizations and in these types of roles in politics and government? Jess, you want to start for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, as someone who had a congressional internship for her first internship as well, the culture still sort of persisted, right? I took on this role and it was unpaid. I was there 40 hours a week, and I was doing all sorts of things where my parents, who were not very politically engaged at that level, were just like, "What? Why are you doing this for free? Go be an engineer." And never mind that I'm terrible at math and science. But I think we can think of this problem, or this ongoing problem, in two ways. Yes, it is still a problem. I talk to people now, especially some of my colleagues who are older than me, and they still say, "Well, it's sometimes we just can't help it. This is just the way it is." And I think we first have to recognize, yes, it's a problem, but B, we also have to recognize that because this idea keeps persisting, we're teaching people to sort of accept the idea that public service and working in these sectors just aren't worth that much monetarily, right? And that's not something that we should be doing. So kind of a C approach, I'd like to think that it is our responsibility, as we recognize these problems, to push for change. I know that whenever I start a new position, I talk to, whether it's my district director or my chief of staff, or in the case of Pay Our Interns, our executive director, and say, hey, we need to make sure that everyone we bring on is sort of properly compensated and their work is recognized, because I remember being an intern and it's not okay that they aren't. So, and then I also always encourage our interns to set up hard boundaries. When they come in, I tell them, look, we're going to get you paid. I want to make sure that you're not working extra hours. If it's not a working hours, I want you to not pick up your phones. So it's up to us to help advocate for the next generations. And then I think that helps build on the culture and the momentum that we're seeing right now, especially with something like the Great Resignation, that it's okay to not accept what has been the status quo. So really, it's a question of identifying the problem, sort of talking and educating on the problem, and also being willing to actually be the person to say that's not okay. And I know it's scary, but we've all been through it. And the first time that someone says it's not okay, more people are like, yeah, okay, I'll think about it. And then they're willing to speak up too. So there's a couple of ways to approach it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciated the way you're characterizing it as, as people who have perhaps gone through these processes this way. It's actually, it's also not acceptable to say, well, I had to suffer and that is part of politics, therefore you should suffer too, because that's how you really learn to be part of the struggle or really learn to be an advocate, right? It really is about us also recognizing that we have opportunities as we've done this work, right, to change how things are done, even if it's incremental at the moment, right? Jessica, I wanted to turn to you and ask, what do you identify as some of the key challenges to really expanding who's part of these pipelines and who's part of this kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, I really relate with a lot of what has been shared. My first internship out of undergrad was full-time, unpaid. And, I remember going into it, and one of the things they set us up with was like, it's not going to be paid, but we're going to help you get on food stamps. And at the time thinking like, I mean, this is great. They're going to help and they're going to offer it. And there's this resource. And I think back and about just how willing I was to accept, being on food stamps versus being paid an adequate wage. And I think it is very much these things that make us, that kind of like get ingrained in us, of thinking that we need to work ourselves up. We need to start at this, to somewhat lower ourselves. And I think it really ingrains this imposter syndrome, which I know many women of color can suffer with, coming into these spaces of thinking that, we don't have the wherewithal to be able to advocate for ourselves in these spaces and to speak up. And what it leads to is just not being affirmed in our workplaces. This is one of the biggest differences we find in, BIPOC staff who stay in political work, who stay in campaign work, that they are able to be affirmed in a workspace, that they receive regular feedback, that when they speak up about workplace concerns, they are, responded to in a timely, equitable, and sufficient manner. And so really thinking to, just the entry point into this work, we don't see that it's going to be sustainable. Not all of us have the access to take an unpaid internship. Not all of us have the funds to move for a new campaign job or to be in work that is only going to be for a couple months. You need something consistent. So really starting to break down some of those barriers by, talking to the other people on your staff, building a team agreement, having conversations with other people on your staff so that that you have the resources that you need, so that your expertise as staff is honored by the managers that are working on your campaigns, so that this work can become more sustainable and so that we can see careers for ourselves in this work.
Thank you, Jessica. I want to turn to Charlotte on this question and sort of ask you, my sense is that from your work with Ready to Launch, you've sort of been able to take a broader view and see sort of lots of people's experiences with this. What do you think are really some of the broader or more structural challenges to really diversifying and specifically creating more access for women of color in these roles?
Yeah, I think definitely the fact that unpaid internships are still often the norm is a huge barrier to accessibility. The other things I often see and that are still very pervasive across party lines are that jobs are often not posted online or are in these really archaic and hard to access websites, or if you didn't know they existed, there would be no way for you to find them. And because many of us don't have those networks, we don't know where to start and we don't know where to look for a lot of these jobs. And I've heard chiefs of staff boast like, oh, well, I only hire people that I know. And you just sit there and think to yourself, like, well, how can you possibly get, a diverse staff if you're only hiring people from your network? And, I think that's one thing we see a lot of. And there's just not proactive outreach to communities and proactive outreach to women of color, low income women. I think, there's a lot of focus and still on elitism in these spaces where, we're not reaching out to folks where they are and educating them about the career possibilities. And so therefore folks don't know these careers exist. And so if you don't know it exists, how can you possibly even find it? And then obviously, I think because so many of these spaces still are male dominated and mostly white, wealthy men, I think, it's really important for us when we are in these spaces to advocate for pay, to make the effort to recruit staff from other places and really be those voices for our communities, because I think that's how we really move the needle. And that's why we need more women of color in the staff pipeline.
Thank you, Charlotte. One of the things that really resonated across all three responses was really how hard it is to sort of know how to navigate and how to start, and having sort of preconceived notions of like that there is a correct pathway, there is a main pathway. I know that lots of the undergraduate students I talk to think that, okay, a political internship means I go and work for an elected, or I go and get on a political campaign. And in my work with students and in my work with candidates from different communities, there's often a concern about the precarity of that kind of work, and so you have this idea that that's the only way to be an advocate, right? Or that's the only way to sort of work in politics without being an elected yourself. But at the same time, that comes up against this very real notion that, that's not what my family immigrated to this country for me to do, is to have a job that I could lose in 2 years when this guy's out of office, right? Or, that this type of undervalued work or precarious kind of work is not why, you know, the multi-generational wealth building project that my family has been engaged in. It's not how my family sees success. And so I think that in part has to do with, you know, the communities that we come from, but it also has to do with sort of our understanding of the range of types of work that you can really engage in when we talk about staff in government, in politics, and in advocacy. So I'm going to ask you to start us off, Jessica, and in thinking about, you know, it is answering the question, you know, is the only way to work in politics and advocacy to go for work for an elected? And what do you, when someone asks you, well, what does the landscape of this kind of job actually look like? Take us through that a little bit and help us understand, like, what is that range?
Yeah, and I would love to speak to it from the perspective of campaigns, which is the work that I do at Arena. And you know, working a campaign is a great entry point to begin to consider whether you want a career in politics and to get an understanding of the landscape. So I think first and foremost, looking for a candidate that really aligns with your values, finding a candidate and staff where you really see what you care about, what you want to work towards in this world, and beginning to build those relationships. Relationship building as an organizer, or whether you work in communications or field, starting to talk to people and really having an understanding, especially in the campaign space where you're kind of all in it together. At a certain point, the sense of hierarchy is lost when you're in GOTV, when you're in Get Out the Vote, and you know, working towards that election day. You really get into this team environment where you're all working together, and that is a really great place to begin to build relationships and get to know whether this is an environment that works for you, whether this is something that you want to continue with. Because also some of the realities of working on a campaign that you know, might not be sustainable is that sense that like it's going to be over in 2 months, or that sense that you need to move if you want to work up, if you want to build up and work, you know, get a better position. So really getting a sense for if this lifestyle is something that will work for you, and whether this is the somewhat itinerant nature of a campaign is something that you want to work towards. Because, you know, just because you work for the candidate and you get them in office doesn't exactly mean that you'll go into their administration. So I think really talking to the people that you're working with, and an emphasis on building those relationships, because those are going to be the people that you reach out to in the future, whether you continue working in campaigns or are trying to, you know, move on to some other sector of politics. I really believe in centering the relationships.
Great, thank you, Jess. What do you think about this question? What's out there in terms of the landscape of possibilities?
So a lot of my work has primarily been on the more official side. So working for the elected after they've been elected to office. And I've actually been thinking a lot about your question while everyone has been talking. I would encourage people to explore their interests. It doesn't have to be a straight pathway from a political internship straight into government and just professionally onto government. I have an MA in war studies, and I have an MA in intelligence and international security, which is actually where my academic interest lies. I've primarily worked in government, but I've seen how my academic interests have actually overlapped with my political interests, such as everyone's like, well, Jess is like the best at security, so how can you secure our office? And I think having that type of diversity is really important when you're going into an office, because A, you know what your skills are beyond just working for an elected, and B, it also gives you some flexibility to sort of jump back and forth between these different landscapes, which I think is important. I see a lot of people who might just want to stay in one position perpetually, and that actually does create burnout. So having that flexibility and having that sort of mental, like, okay, I'm good at this, but I'm also good at this, and if the time comes, I can jump to something else, I think is really important, especially in this sort of great resignation landscape where I think we're learning how how to better value our work and what we expect of employers to sort of give back to us in return. So that's kind of my roundabout way of answering your question.
Yeah, thank you. And Charlotte, Jess was talking about people resigning from their jobs or thinking about these transitions. And so as we're talking about sort of what the landscape looks like, I'd love it if you can speak to sort of how people transition between these different sectors, right? You still want to be an advocate, you still want to play a role in something that's, meaningful to communities outside your own doorstep. But how do you make that, what does that transition look like for folks? And is it something that's possible? Can you go from being in nonprofit work to staff and vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's very common for folks to flex between the different sectors or the different industries within government advocacy and politics. As I shared, I started my career in finance, and since then, I basically am the finance operations person in nonprofit or on a political campaign. I do like all the budgeting, things like that. So building your skills, I think, is one way to kind of go. And I think it's also important to know that political experience isn't the only valuable experience. I think having retail experience, having customer service experience or food service experience where you're dealing with the public, you're thinking on your feet, you're solving problems regularly, are so important and translatable to all of these jobs. And I think we often see folks who will work on a political campaign. Sometimes they'll go into the administration and work for the person who gets elected. Sometimes they'll leave and go work for an advocacy organization because that's the issue that really drives them and that they're really passionate about. And that's kind of where I always think about when you're trying to figure out where the right place for you to go is to start. I think none of us go into this work because we think we're going to get rich. We do it because we are passionate about serving our communities, and there's something inside us that calls us to this work. And I think trying to tap into that and figure out what that is kind of will help you figure out, which place is right for you. And it's different at different times, right? Like for me, I think getting that political experience was so important and so critical. I still volunteer on campaigns. I still consult on campaigns every once in a while. But then, moving into the advocacy and nonprofit space allows me to have a little more career stability and also still do work that I'm passionate about and work with the communities I'm passionate about. But it's just a different angle. And I think it's very normal and honestly kind of exciting that you can move between all of these spaces and that there's no straight path at all.
Yeah, and so in terms of thinking about how you navigate these types of transitions or how you sort of figure out, a lot of the issues that folks have been talking about, how do you make this sustainable work? How do you find the campaigns that you want to be part of? I think a lot of that in many places, right, that is it's still sort of very ad hoc and kind of depends on, who you know and who you've run into. And we know that the kinds of selection bias that can introduce into the process. And so I'll start again with you, Charlotte, because I'd like to ask people, so what resources, what programs are out there that people should know about that really help women of color access these kinds of opportunities or think about how to make them sustainable? I'll speak from my own initial experience, right, which was that basically it was, there was one other senior staffer in the office next door who was also an Asian American woman. And she just sat me down one day and had like an official talk with me about the do's and don'ts of being on staff and whether this is something you want to do. For me, being, I always tell undergraduates who come to me and ask about internships, try as many things as you can. As whatever you have the resources to try it. You might love working for an elected. You might love being in that role and connecting that person to a community. I didn't in my first job, and I found that out right away. But I also figured out later, having worked with lots of other elected officials, there's variation in what types of offices they run and the kind of environment and work they do. But there were other ways, but it was all very ad hoc and sort of a kind of try as you go and figure it out as you go situation. And so, Charlotte, I'll start with you. What kind of resources and programs should people be looking out for in terms of expanding access to these kinds of roles and opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, shamelessly, I'll plug Ready to Launch.
All good, yeah.
So we run a paid fellowship program, and we also do a number of these events where we co-host to really elevate the stories of women of color staff in these spaces, and also to provide insight into the career pathways. We do a career spotlight series where we talk about, legal careers in politics and government, or communications careers in politics and government, to really expose folks to the number of different resources. We also have a huge resources list on our website, which I think someone can drop into the chat in a little bit. But I think some other really great places to go, aside from the organizations that these other wonderful panelists work for, are, thinking about looking at your county parties. So the Republican Party and the Democratic Party both have, internships and resources and jobs, as well as training that they do. Looking at the elected officials whose policies you really identify, and looking to see if they have any internships or jobs listed on their website. And also being proactive, like reach out to folks, connect with folks on LinkedIn. I think especially when you're a young person, like, there's never a time a young person approaches me and I am not willing to help them, and I am not willing to provide them, 30 minutes to chat about their career. And I think that's a lot of people in this space feel that way, because we've all been there. So be proactive, connect with folks, reach out to folks. I think the other places, you can look are other organizations that advocate for the issues you really care about. So there's tons of advocacy and nonprofit organizations who have paid internships, who fight for a lot of the issues we all care about. And so those are kind of a few buckets of places I think you can start looking.
Great, thank you. Jessica, how about you? What do you think about, where do you want to get people to go looking for more resources for this work?
Yeah, I will also shamelessly plug the work of Arena. So what we do at Arena is we train progressive staff, and that's really the core of the work that we do. We have a 5-day training called our Arena Academy, where we train campaign staff. You apply for one of 7 tracks, which align with the different roles you would likely hold on a campaign. And with our training program, we really focus on bringing in women of color, again, people of color, members of the LGBTQ community. So you get this 5-day intensive. But most importantly, after the training, you work with our careers team. So we will help match you with career opportunities on campaigns. Or if you're not looking for work in campaigns, we also help place you in and offer recommendations within progressive organizations. But outside of that, also really helping with the career journey. So once you take Academy, you get access to placement coaching, interview coaching, and networking, and working your resume or negotiating your salary offer, to really help you navigate whatever your next steps are in your career. So I have that plug for Arena, and then I think like the plug just for me and my experiences, I really believe in starting local. So someone else mentioned volunteering. I think volunteering is a really great way to get involved, understand the things that you might think that you're passionate about, but really getting to dig into and get hands-on experience to those matters that you care about. I think volunteering in your community, but also talking to your neighbors, going to a community board meeting, stopping by your public library. These entry points into our neighborhoods, and really knowing the community that we're in, maybe joining a mutual aid organization, whatever it might be, starting on the small scale. Because I often believe those relationships that might feel small often reverberate into deeper, bigger relationships that can help you navigate what it is that you're looking for.
Thank you, Jessica. And one of the things you said that really resonated with me was this idea of, sometimes I think we think of campaign work and political work as sort of parachuting into a state, a purple state, you know, and going and doing a lot of GOTV or working on the ground in a state you've never been in before. But, you know, some of the most profound movements in this country politically have been people really digging into the place where they live, right? And really starting with those relationships with their next door neighbors, because who knows your community better than you, right? So that's wonderful. Jess, what do you think in terms of resources and programs where we can get people to start looking?
Yeah, so I really want to encourage everyone to start looking for staffer networks. A lot of staffers, like they build together networks and to consolidate information. So I'm currently based out of Orange County, and in Southern California, we have something called APE House, and it's all the Asian Pacific American staffers in the area. We all throw our information to listserv. We do networking events. And I think that's a really good way to sort of see like what certain communities are doing and how you can sort of reach out and be a part of those communities as well. And I think specifically for me and also for Pay Our Interns, I would encourage people to reach out on social media. I will admit I am a little older than Gen Z, so I'm kind of very used to approaching potential employers in a formal way. I'll send them emails, but more and more people are posting about job opportunities on social media. Like we amplify on Pay Our Interns. And most of those employers are very happy to hear from you when you can drop them a message and say, hey, I'd like to, schedule some time to talk to you about that job. And sort of echoing what Charlotte said, everyone sort of understands what it's like to be in that position. So it's not uncommon for someone to respond and say, great, I have 15 minutes tomorrow. Do you want to meet? And that's a really good way to start learning and getting your foot in the door and seeing if those opportunities are right for you.
Yeah, and I want to use that as a way to think about moving into some of the questions that we've gotten from our audience. And I encourage anybody who's listening in to this amazing panel to send your questions to the Q&A function. One of the questions that somebody had raised was, do you have to live in DC for political jobs? And it sounds like from what you guys have been talking about, there's lots of opportunities where you are, wherever that is, right? In terms of what types of political jobs you can find locally. And often, I would say from my own experience, and let me know if this is different from what you've seen, but it's often less opaque to work locally, right? There are more ways in and more roadways in when you're trying to work with a local chapter of an organization or work with a local elected official's office, then, kind of just calling up the DCCC and seeing sort of what shakes out in an off election year. So, another question that we've gotten is about thinking about the context of this kind of work and the leadership, right? I think one of the things that, we often hear, one of the stories we often hear about in this type of work is that, a lot of the big flagship national organizations that are progressive, for instance, are still dominated by white male leaders, right? And really that brings a certain culture to that environment that is not necessarily one that advances the leadership and work of women of color or the communities they care about. And so one of the questions from the audience was that, how do you navigate that type of bureaucracy to either establish the kind of allyship that you guys have talked about in different capacities, either through networks of staffers and other things, or to really advance, women of color's roles in these organizations. Does anybody want to start?
I'm happy to start. So, I have oftentimes been the only woman or only Asian woman in a lot of these spaces. And, I think the way that I've been able to navigate a lot of these spaces is by building trust with the folks that I work with. And that, often is unfortunately, basically being the best and doing the work and really showing up so that I have credibility when I come to folks and say to them, maybe we're not recruiting folks from, these different backgrounds that reflect the constituents that we serve because we're not proactively reaching out, or maybe we could change the way we do our recruiting, or, trying to bring up these issues in a way where people, look at me and say, I respect Charlotte. I know she works hard. I know that she gets the job done. And if she's saying that, then that must mean that there's something there that we need to reevaluate. And I think trying to build trust across communities is really important. I think the other thing too is supporting other women that you work with in these spaces to speak up and use their voices. You know, a lot of times in male dominated spaces, I'll make the point to, you know, double click on something that a female colleague will say to make sure that it's elevated, and then that woman gets the credit for bringing that up. And I think a lot of those kind of little things really do make a difference in terms of how you kind of navigate these spaces. But you know, I think the unfortunate reality is that a lot of the times we have to be better than our white male colleagues. And that's just kind of the landscape that's there. But I think when you are and you use your voice to bring more people into the field and use your power to bring more women like yourself into the spaces, I think that's how we really create the change that we want to see.
Yeah, any other thoughts from either Jess or Jessica about sort of navigating this? This is part of the context that a lot of folks are working in these spaces.
Yeah, I really want to echo Charlotte in saying that it is unfortunate that sometimes we just really have to be the best in the room, right? I do find that when I'm the only Asian woman in the situation, I sometimes find that I have to default to my credentials. Like, yes, I have a master's from Johns Hopkins to sort of set the tone and prove the point. It's not ideal. And ideally, as we sort of progress, we can move further away from that. But right now, that's kind of the reality of the situation. And once you sort of set the tone, then you start establishing credibility, and then you start pushing. You start pushing for others, you start pushing what you want to see. And so it's not an ideal situation right now, but that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment. I would also say it's important, skill-wise, I think to be able to really learn how to read the room. Sometimes I'll walk into a room and be like, okay, this is one of those situations where I have to be like, yes, I have all these fancy degrees. But sometimes it's you kind of have to adapt and be a chameleon and be like, okay, so you are a staffer too, or you were a former staffer, so I'm going to drop that credential and then I'm going to tell you what I need. So I really want to encourage everyone to just sort of be proactive and sort of work on that skills as we start pushing for further progress.
Jessica, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, and I would echo Justin, setting the tone and being proactive with you know, how we show up in a space. I think having as much transparency as possible in, you know, maybe in working with your upper management, you go into that role and, you know, ask what are my metrics for success? What are some key performance indicators that are going to let me know that I'm working towards what the goals that I need to set and where I need to be going. Having an organization chart, knowing who holds what role. Some of these things that are often just implicit, making them very explicit in how we are showing up in that space. And then, yeah, again, I think the unfortunate of needing to be the best, and often the situations we walk into. But I think if we can lead with setting that tone, then we're at least setting ourselves up for as much success as possible in what we are bringing with our presence.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so interesting listening to this conversation and reflecting, it does reflect so many of the conversations I've had with people who work as candidates and advocates and on staff is really about how do you create the space for the leadership of women of color, even as you fight to make sure it exists in the first place, right? And how do you work to expand what we think of as leadership, even as you yourself are fighting to stay in it, right? And I think that for me, one of the things I would say is that when we have different roles, I always encourage people to think about whatever the tiniest amount of power that you have is, using it, right? Because it really is, if you have a tiny amount of power, if you're on a staff and you have one unpaid intern and that is the person you lead, how can you change what they think what the credentials are? How can you change what they think, you know, it looks like to lead? And I think that whether we're at a level in an organization where we are the intern or whether we're running a national campaign, I think at each of those levels, there's different pockets of power to access. And I think what the challenge for us is to change the way we came up, right? And to change what we say are the credentials that matter, or what we say are the metrics that matter in terms of promoting and advancing the leadership of others. and it doesn't necessarily only have to do with, bringing other women of color in, although, that's an incredibly important part of it. I think it's also, reshaping from wherever we sit, right, what the framework is for understanding what leadership looks like and what success looks like in these different types of roles. Okay, so I want to ask one last question, and it's a little bit related because, I think one of the things that Jess was talking about is sort of like, what are the credentials you bring? And, one of the conversations I often have with people is that I tell undergrads, you can go have a political internship now, but I actually think it's a great idea to go work in an area that you feel passionate about, so that when you do go into politics someday, right, you have something to say, you have experience in the world to talk about as an advocate or as somebody who worked in this area. And I think that relates to one of the questions we got from the audience, which is like, is this whole thing for 22-year-olds, right? Or how do you think about making that transition in your 30s? I left my first career in politics when I was 30. And I really think a lot about going from being the youngest person in the room to not the youngest person in the room anymore. And what that means for a career transition into and out of these different spaces in politics. So does anybody have any sort of final thoughts about sort of how this works if you're at a different place in your career other than coming out of undergrad?
Yeah, I'd go back
Jessica.
to emphasizing that, you don't have to have, there's no one degree that sets you up for this work in politics. And that we can come from many different angles, and many backgrounds will prepare us for this work. And it's more than having a certain background. If you're transitioning or making a career change, it's about understanding what the connection is between your background is and the work that you've been doing, that connection between your previous work and where you want to go. So I think connecting those dots for whoever the potential employer might be is really important. And then along with that, really understanding your why and leading with that. I think pairing those two things together really help in making that connection as to why you're making that career transition at whatever point that you're in.
Great, thank you. Charlotte or Jess, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would really echo Jessica in saying that, I would encourage people not to underestimate themselves, right? You are bringing skills sort of already with an established career into politics. And to really build on Jessica's point, you just need to understand where you fit into that role. So for example, I know someone who has been a filmmaker for a very long time, and they decided to get politically involved over the last few years. And they're like, okay, well, I have great filmmaking skills, so I can cut digital ads for candidates, right? Or I can offer editing skills. Or I know someone else who is, she's a very good public speaker. And then so she acts as a digital surrogate for campaigns. So it's really about just knowing how you fit into that space. And sometimes if you don't know, I would encourage people to reach out and ask, because sometimes you can be like, here's my resume and I am good at these things. What do you need? And more often than not, especially sometimes in the campaign space, they might be like, that's fantastic. You're great at organization. We need someone who can help us keep track of our finances. So just don't underestimate yourself, and just really know that people want your skills in politics. They're really happy to have that fresh perspective, and you can bring that to the table.
Thank you. And Charlotte, as one of our hosts, I will give you the quick last word on this question.
Sure. Yeah, I'll echo. I think so many skills are translatable. The other thing I'll say too is I do think it is something to consider, especially when we're women of color, around, sometimes you can't afford to take a pay cut to get the experience. Sometimes you can't afford to take some of these jobs that maybe are not as profitable as others. But I think there's many ways to be involved. You can volunteer for an organization, or, there's foundations who give out money to organizations that do really great work. There's, nonprofit organizations or foundations within the private sector. Many companies do corporate social responsibility work where you can still be a part of that change work and contribute to the communities you serve while also being able to afford, the life that you might already have or the families that you need to support. And so I think there's so many different avenues into this work, and it doesn't have to necessarily be, taking that unpaid internship or volunteering, but there's different ways to enter. But I definitely think, translating your skills to the different spaces is something that folks do all the time, and something that all of us have done at certain points.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all three of our panelists for really helping us to sort of illuminate the kaleidoscope of possibilities in terms of this type of work and these different types of roles and pathways we can have to be advocates and to be people who are stepping forward and leading for our communities. So thank you so much for everyone who's joined us, and I hope to see you all next time.